Can I completely change myself? There is perhaps no desire more human than the wish to become someone else. Someone better, stronger, wiser, more successful, more attractive, more confident. The self-help industry exists as a monument to this longing, promising transformation through techniques, programs, and systems. The underlying assumption is profound, that the self is malleable, that identity can be reconstructed, that who we are today is not who we must remain tomorrow. But observe what actually happens when someone embarks on a project of total self-transformation. A man decides he will become completely different. He will exercise daily, eat perfectly, think only positive thoughts, eliminate all bad habits, develop new skills, transform his personality, remake his entire life. The initial enthusiasm is genuine, the commitment sincere, the vision inspiring. For a few weeks, perhaps even months, dramatic changes occur. The new routine takes hold. The old patterns seem to dissolve. He feels like a different person, looks like a different person, acts like a different person. Success appears within reach. But gradually, subtly, the old patterns begin to reassert themselves, not all at once but piece by piece. A skipped workout becomes a skipped week. A single unhealthy meal becomes a return to old eating habits. A moment of negative thinking becomes a flood of familiar mental patterns. The person who felt transformed finds themselves mysteriously reverting to previous behaviors. This is not a failure of willpower or technique. This reveals something fundamental about the nature of change itself. What exactly is it that wants to change? And what is it that resists change? The part of consciousness that desires transformation is often the same part that maintains the current patterns. The ego that says I must become different is the very mechanism that created and sustains what it now wants to escape. It's like trying to lift yourself by pulling on your own shoelaces. The effort uses the same system it's trying to transcend. But there's something even more subtle at work here. The desire to completely change oneself often contains a fundamental rejection of what is. It implies that the current self is somehow inadequate, wrong, unacceptable. This rejection creates a kind of internal war between who we are and who we think we should be. Watch what happens when this war intensifies. The harder someone fights against their current patterns, the more energy those patterns seem to gain. The more someone tries to eliminate aspects of their personality, the more those aspects seem to persist. Resistance creates persistence, yet change clearly does occur. People do transform their lives, develop new capacities, shift their patterns of behavior and thinking. How does real change happen if not through force and effort? Observe children learning to walk. They don't set up complex programs for locomotion transformation. They don't judge their crawling as inadequate. They don't force themselves to walk. Walking emerges naturally when the conditions are right, when the body is ready, when the impulse arises. The change is organic, effortless, inevitable. Perhaps genuine transformation happens similarly, not through violent reconstruction of the self, but through natural evolution when awareness brings light to unconscious patterns. A woman notices her tendency to interrupt others during conversation. She doesn't launch a campaign against interrupting or set up elaborate systems to control her speech. She simply becomes aware of the pattern. In that awareness, something begins to shift naturally, not through force, but through illumination. This is change through understanding rather than change through effort. When we see clearly how a pattern operates, its triggers, its function, its cost, sometimes the pattern simply dissolves in the light of awareness. Like darkness disappearing when a lamp is lit. But this raises a profound question. If change happens naturally through awareness, what is there to do? Perhaps the question itself contains a false premise. Maybe there is no separate self that can change another self. Maybe what we call change is actually the recognition that what we took to be solid and permanent was always fluid and temporary. The person who believes they need to completely change often discovers that what they were trying to change was never as fixed as they imagined. Personality traits that seemed carved in stone reveal themselves to be temporary weather patterns in consciousness. Habits that felt permanent dissolve when their unconscious nature is brought into the light. In this recognition, the project of self-transformation changes completely. Instead of trying to become someone else, there is curiosity about what one already is beneath all the patterns and conditioning. The investigation reveals something extraordinary. Beneath all the characteristics we want to change, there is something that has never needed changing. Something that was present before any patterns formed, and will remain after all patterns dissolve. This doesn't mean behavioral change is impossible or unnecessary. Habits can shift, skills can develop, perspectives can evolve. But these changes happen more naturally when they're not forced by a separate self trying to improve itself. When change comes from this deeper place, it tends to be stable because it's not based on effort that must be constantly maintained. It's like the difference between a dam holding back water and a river naturally flowing toward the sea. The person who stops trying to completely change themselves often finds that appropriate changes begin happening spontaneously. Not because they're working toward transformation, but because awareness naturally brings wisdom to unconscious patterns. This wisdom doesn't operate through rules and disciplines, but through immediate recognition of what serves and what doesn't. The person might still choose the healthy meal, but not because they're following a diet plan, because awareness recognizes what the body actually wants. Can you change completely? Well, yeah. The question assumes there is a solid self that can be replaced by a different solid self. But investigation reveals that both the changer and the changed are more like temporary formations in an ocean of awareness. In this recognition, the desperate project of self-improvement relaxes into something more organic. Not the effort to become someone else, but the natural expression of what one already is, beneath all the accumulations of conditioning. What is this that needs no change to be complete? This awareness that remains perfect while all patterns come and go. This being that can allow transformation without being threatened by it.